Okay, so welcome back. Now today we're going to look at an aspect of software development that is really crucial. And I think a lot of people tend to view it as an annoyance and really don't need it because they assume, oh, I know what's going on with my software. And what we're talking about is the requirement that in your software design you include some sort of debugging and logging to make sure you understand down at the lowest level what's actually going on with your software. And if you don't understand that, you think you do, but in fact you're confused about what's going on, it's very easy to get bad results in your software, and trying to figure out where the problem is can be extremely difficult unless you do what we're going to talk about today, and that is find ways that are easy that you can debug and log the data, log what's going on in your application, and get some feedback on what's actually happening rather than assuming you know and in fact not really having any clue. So what we're going to do, this is an example, an application that we were talking about in a recent challenge I did, where I challenged people to try and come up with an algorithm for what looks like a very simple application, but in fact can be very complex and require lots of iterations and some very deep levels of code. And this is the application where we're taking some pairs of numbers and from those pairs trying to generate this diagram of a real-world electric power system. And these lines were buses, and there's also lines between the buses. And the challenge was to figure out the algorithm to place these buses based solely on some pairs of numbers. And it turns out the algorithm to do that is really complicated. And it's the reason why I offered that as a challenge for people to do. And in fact, it's a perfect example of how it's really important that you understand exactly what's going on in your code down at the lowest level. You know, knowing exactly what the iteration values are and what the indices of your arrays are and what the actual numbers are rather than just assuming. And what I've done in this application is employed a technique we're going to talk about where I have gotten some feedback on exactly what's going on in the algorithm to place these buses, and it's being printed out in this text box. And one of the challenges you may be aware of when you're trying to log data and do debugging in C# Visual Studio Windows Forms applications is that this form and the controls like the text box, it can be very annoying and difficult to try and get the data that you want to get feedback on, try to get access to the text box and these controls. And one of the reasons is because the controls in these forms are on a main thread. And when you get off working on separate classes and in different threads, it can be very challenging to try to get access to the main thread so you can display the data in, for example, a text box. So what we're going to talk about is a very simple way that I like to use to be able to access your controls in your form to get feedback on what's actually going on and do it very simply and very quickly. And you can see here, this application, I used the technique which we show here, where I was looking at the specifics of the algorithm that I used to place these buses. And here I've got some feedback on low-level numbers. Explain to me why at one point this algorithm wasn't working, and was solely because I had an if statement that didn't handle the else situation. And by getting these numbers as feedback, it quickly occurred to me why I wasn't getting the right response from my application. So we're going to show you a very simple way to be able to, at any point in your application, no matter what thread you're on or what class you're running or what method you're running, be able to access the controls on your form. So let's take a look at the application. So here's my application for placing the buses. Now what I generally do in my projects in C# Visual Studio Windows Forms is I go to my project and I will right click and I will add a new item, and it will be a class. And I've already added that, And the class I've added is this simple class called a data logger. And it's a public static class. And that's really important. You make it a public static class. And the reason is because if it's public and static, then any point in your application, you will be able to access this class. You don't have to instantiate it. It's just there. And any data you can access. And all I've got in this data logger class is a public static string, which I'm calling log string. Now, the nice thing is, no matter where I am in my application, what class I'm in, what thread I'm on, I can add data to this string, or I can have lists, I can have any type of data, but I can add to that public static string, I can add any information about what's going on in my application. And on my main form, I can, in a button click event handler, or when I'm done with my application, in this case, where I actually draw my image, what I can do is I can say textbox1.append text, and I can reference that log string. And whatever in that string, I can print it to the text box. And that's what I did here. So all I have to do at any point in my application is add data to that string. And in my main form, I can just do an append text and add that data. So let's look at an example of how I am grabbing that data from my application. So here's a class where I am doing the logic to place the buses on that diagram. And in one of the methods that does the logic to place the buses, that doesn't have direct access to my text box. However, since I'm using a public static class, all I need to do is access that data logger.log string, as you see here, and just fill it with text. So for example, here I'm doing some logic and I'm looking at the placement of the bus. So all I have to do is say data logger.log string, and I concatenate to the existing string using a plus equals, and I'm adding this data like the bus number, carriage return line feed, and then what row we're looking at, what's the row number. And then, for example, if I have to place a bus, I have to make sure it's in a place that doesn't already have some occupied buses. So I'm placing how many available positions are there above this and how many are below this, so I can make sure that I'm placing it in the correct spot. And that's all I have to do. Just anytime I want to grab data from my algorithm as I go through the steps, all I have to do is say datalogger.log string and then add and concatenate data to that string. And then when I'm all done with my application, or at any point in the application, I can automatically go back to that data logger and print out that string to a text box. Now again, I can use lists, I can use any type of data, but here I'm just using a simple string that I am appending at any point in my application. Okay, so that's it for this one. If you like any of these videos, I encourage you to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell notifications. But most of all, please let others know that we're here so we get some views. Really appreciate it. Otherwise, take care. Have a really good day. Thanks.